Right. We're good to go. Cool. Welcome, everybody, to March. Apologies. We have three from T. Clark, E. Pearson, and M. Wells, replaced by B. Burton, S. C. Runciman, and R. Melly. Welcome. You'll enjoy it. All right, you won't. Declaration of interest. Have we any? Oh, we have one. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Just two things. One, there's a couple of references throughout the papers to the Your Disability Rights Forum. I've just made clear to everybody, for the interest of transparency, that my mum sits on the steering group of the Your Disability Rights Forum, so haven't discussed anything within this papers with her, but just, as I say, for transparency. And then the other is a personal non-prejudicial interest, which is of a sensitive nature in relation to agenda item 7. I've had a quick conversation with the Deputy Monitoring Officer, who's satisfied that there's nothing within the interest that would impair my judgment or affect my decision making, but just wanted to acknowledge that interest.
Thank you. That's it. Lovely. Thank you. Minutes of the last meeting being circulated. Any comments? Oh, Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to propose that we add a bullet point to, let me just find the page, sorry, page 4, minute 33. When we were discussing SACRE, we had quite a lot of discussion, and it was me that was raising it, around the independent external providers of religious education and how they're monitored. And I think officers sort of acknowledged that there was the monitoring framework didn't necessarily cover the external providers that were coming in to deliver some of the things. So if members are happy, I would propose just adding a bullet point between the first two that says independent external providers of religious education to schools were not directly monitored as part of this process.
Any comments? Support? Disagreement? I'll take that as everyone agrees with him, Councillor Crawshaw. Thank you. Can we add that in, please? With that amendment, are we happy to pass them through? Good. Right. First report, Finance Quarter 3. Richard, welcome back.
Give a brief intro. Yeah. Okay. So this is the third monitor that I brought to you this year. I'm covering expenditure income up until the 31st of December, and it also covers performance for the same period. I mean, as usual, councillors, you've got a extract of the report that went to the main council executive on the overall council budget in January. And the first couple of pages on this paper are setting out the overall council position. I would just touch on that briefly. So I think at Monitor 3, the overall council position was a small improvement, but not significant improvement on Monitor 2, but still projecting gross unmitigated pressures across the whole council of around about £11 million. And clearly that's then mitigated down to a balanced position, because of course the council has to end the year on a balanced position, as that's the law. But using significant elements of earmarked and potentially general reserves to bring us down to that final position on the overall council budget. And then the rest of the paper is a look at the budgets that within the remit of this scrutiny committee. So that's all of the children and education department and a small section of the of Pauline Stutchill's department, culture and communities, is also included in this remit. And the table at paragraph 13 summarises the position at Monitor 3. And again, you'll see for these budgets, we're again showing a small, modest improvement of just over £30,000 on the projected overspend. So still a significant projected variation of about 3.7 million across these services. You'll probably see, as you're looking through the narratives and the explanations, that there's not been a significant change in that since Monitor 2. So a lot of that is similar descriptions. We have updated the mitigations table, which is below the summary table at paragraph 13, just to show what's actually in there and what mitigations are being proposed to try and bring down the sort of gross position down to the 3.7 million before the end of the year. So I'm happy to stop there and take questions or comments from councillors.
Yeah, thanks. It's probably it's not so much on the finance, so it might be rookie error. So it's more so on the scrutiny scorecard, so it might be for yourself, Martin. I just think there's a statistic, remember correctly, back that the kind of MASH front door team takes measures of how many referrals are coming through the front door and how many people are coming in. I think it's a really good measure of kind of how much pressure the council's under in terms of requests and need for help, which often doesn't always feed through to the statistics itself. So I wondered whether it was something that might be worth adding in future. Obviously, I don't think you're worried it becomes a bit of a stick to beat people with if it's response times, everything, which isn't the intention at all, because I know how much work you're under, but I think it's a useful measure to give people an understanding what's going on.
Yeah, certainly. Very happy to put the front door data in, actually, which is useful data in terms of understanding the ups and downs of the contacts that are made, as well as the contacts that are then turned into referrals into social care. As you say, it doesn't all go to the end. I think what I will say, just whilst I've got the opportunity, was there's a very small change, a positive change, that's in the context of the Children's Services Directorate saving around £3.5 million in around 15 months, which is something that is considerably different from probably what you're seeing nationally. Just thought I'd take the opportunity, if that's okay.
You can say it again later. Councillor Nelson.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions about this, or maybe one question and one comment. What the question is, on page 12, it says about the effectiveness and achievement service, mainly due to one-off. It says they're predicted to overspend, mainly due to one-off unexpected expenditure. And I just wondered if you could give us a bit more detail on what that one-off unexpected expenditure is. And I'll come back to my other thing afterwards, if that's all right.
Okay, so within that, I think we're reporting 217,000, if memory serves me right, yeah, on effectiveness achievement. So about 123-ish of that relates to a counselling service for 12 to 15-year-olds, which has, and unfortunately some previous year payments on that as well. So I think there's 70,000 relates to payments for that service prior to 23-24, which we were aware of. And then there's another 53,000 in this year as well. So that creates that pressure. And there's no budget for that expenditure.
I have seen that elsewhere.
It creates the pressure.
Great, thank you. Sorry, that is in the report, those things. I just hadn't realised that's what this bit was talking about. The other thing that I just wanted to sort of raise from the way that we write these more than anything is when we're looking at the performance information, and we have the kind of percentage. So it was things like page 14.34. When you're looking at kind of, say, percentages of children who are overweight, but also when you're looking at percentages of children or adults who are anything, I think that the narrative is almost always, this is the percentage which is lower than the national average. I think we know that when we look at York as a whole, our percentages are almost always lower than the national average, but that doesn't really tell the story of our city. So I was wondering whether, when we look at things like this, I think the bit of information that would be really useful is what is the percentage of the highest achieving and lowest achieving areas of our city within whatever, I think it's relevant to any area that we're talking about, because I think that gap is the big story of our city. And actually it would be just really useful if that could be reflected in the reports. I feel like we're not a city where national averages and our average things are generally very helpful. But really appreciated the report. Thank you.
Just to say that information will be available in other reports, so you will see, obviously, kind of bring so much to scrutiny. So I think you will see a report that goes from public health to the Health and Wellbeing Board that would sort of see some of that breakdown.
I don't suppose we know off the top of our head which those highest and lowest areas would be in the city for childhood obesity, do we?
Not off the top of my head, although
I think the area of most deprivation is Westfields, Councillor Nelson, that's your ward. And the least is Cotmanthorpe, I believe, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of quick questions, hopefully. Again, this is just on paragraph 34 as well on page 14. And notwithstanding what's been said around percentages, it did seem to me that there was quite a significant jump between the number of children at reception year that are obese versus year 6. It's 50% increase. And so I just wondered whether or not now, or perhaps at a future opportunity, whether a little bit more of understanding of what's behind that and driving that. I think we all know it's poverty, but actually, you know, what we're doing as a city. And just a bit of data that might be missing from this report, but I think I have seen this previously. I seem to remember that there was a small but significant number of children in year 6 who were also showing as malnourished. And this is going back a few years ago now. And I just wondered, again, cumulatively, if we're talking sort of nearly a third of the children that are obese, and even if it's only sort of 4 or 5% that are showing as malnourished, it's perhaps again a bigger picture of what's happening, you know, with poverty and deprivation in the city. So I guess just welcome any thoughts on that, and then just one other little area as well.
I'll just pop in briefly on that one. I suppose that it'd be great to see if we had that data, but I think it's worth saying that obesity is a form of malnourishment. It's not what we think of when we talk about malnourishment, but of course that is an issue. And I think that what would be interesting to look at is over the last sort of maybe 10 years or so, how things have changed from obesity being one of the issues to actually undernourishment being the other one. That might be a slightly better way of thinking about it.
And then if I may, my second question, which was just page 15, paragraph 35. And it was just thinking about the unaccompanied asylum seeker children that are coming into the city. And I know we touched on this previously. It might be a lazy assumption, this, so please tell me if it is. My guess would be that there will always be complex needs within children that are looked after, but there may be a different set of complex needs amongst the unaccompanied asylum seekers. And if that number is going to be increasing, it's just knowing that we've got capacity to make sure we're supporting those children as, you know, with their needs, if they're different than the cohort of children that we've previously been supporting, you know, as looked after children.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of their, particularly their trauma-based needs are very different from long-term trauma, early childhood trauma to what they've seen perhaps the last 2 years prior to managing to get to the country. I think we're recognising that in the fact that we're creating a welcome centre for young people aged 16, 17, which is about ensuring that we can best use resources around 4 young people at a time, rather than just one or two young people that come almost ad hoc. The reality is we will continue to see an increase because we're part of the national transfer scheme, as every local authority is. The welcome centre, sorry, the welcome centre will be part of what we call Together We Can, which is a wider team of professionals, including clinical psychologists, speech and language therapy, police, So there's a broad offer, and there will be some additional support that can go into them. But primarily there will be a better offer than we've had previously, I think, for that group.
All happy? Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to paragraph 15. The children looked after figure, and it's understanding the training that's been ongoing to assist with staff within the authority making decisions and ensuring that children are only taken into care where that there's no other alternative process, and it's understanding where that's gone from October to December.
Okay, so we have seen a good, healthy reduction of young people that are looked after, including making a priority for young people returning from the city who previously been placed outside of the city and often in expensive private residential provision, and often with poor outcomes. So we've seen we had 18 young people placed out of city in external residential care. We brought 8 of those young people back, as well as seeing a reduction of the general population of looked after children. That's primarily as a result of putting in a great deal of training around something called signs of safety, which is a national model, international model, in fact, which is about making sure that we manage risk and support children to stay with families and amongst their networks rather than bring them into care. Essentially, in social work, there's sort of two types of practice. One is a rescue model where you identify a risk and you reduce that risk by bringing a child into care. And the other one is about supporting families and networks for children to remain at home. We've introduced, I guess in York over the last 18 months, much more of an approach that's about supporting networks, identifying the support that needs to be in place to keep children at home, which is in line with the government's national care review, which took place the government's response took place, I think in October of last year. So we're much more in line now, I think, with the ambition of this government and all parties actually around keeping children away from the care system, which in itself can be incredibly damaging. So we've seen a reduction about managing risk in a way that is consistent with better training for the workforce that deliver that support.
Cool, thank you. The obesity thing, does that come under health or children? Or do we think it's a joint one? So I think I agree, it's something we should look at as a scrutiny, but it's who does it, because it's healthy children, isn't it? So is that, are the officers a view that Joe's got a view?
I think it broadly comes under public health because it's about a public health outcome, and reducing obesity in children and adults for that matter is a public health outcome.
Right.
So therefore, definitely if you want to look into it in more detail, the public health team is probably the direction you want to go in.
Just to add to that, yes, the Healthy Child Service obviously keeps an eye on this. That's the focus, and I think that probably comes through Health and Wellbeing Board. People are nodding. That's a good sign. So doesn't happen often, but yes, I think that's probably where that is looked at in some detail. So it might be the direction to go into.
So can we get them to come to us then? Chairman, and say to them,
Yeah.
Because we're interested in our children. Seems fair. Put that as a recommendation. If we're all happy. Oh, hang on. Oh, look at that.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear. Who do you want to go where?
So if somebody else is looking at it, but we're interested, when they've looked at it, can they come and tell us what they found, or do we have to go to them?
I'd suggest maybe that's overcomplicating things slightly. And I wouldn't want to duplicate people's workload.
That's what I'm saying. If they're doing it, do we just have to go attend their scrutiny and look at their notes, or Oh, we've got lots of fans going up now. Councillor Runciman, Councillor Crawshaw.
I would have thought, Chair, that if a report is produced on obesity, either in children or adults, that comes to the Health and Wellbeing Board, then it could be referred to this board for information. But I would say very strongly, it's no point in two boards doing exactly the same thing.
No,
I was going to make a similar.
so we'll ask out of interest.
I think if you were to speak to the chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board to find out that they are looking at it, as and when there's a report to produce, of course I was forgetting that. Then you if you have a conversation with Councillor Coles, then anything of use.
Yes.
Come back on that. I'm very happy to ensure that anything that comes around childhood obesity, we actually just did have 2 children's health reports at Health and Wellbeing Board. So I actually, off the top of my head, can't remember at what point in the future it's like that's likely to come around again, but I'll be alert to it and ensure that we refer it on to you guys.
We can have a genuine report to note as opposed to no questions, just a note. It's a noted report. We're not going to question it. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 17 on page 11 is about reviewing direct payments and investigating if there's any way of making savings there. But it includes clawing back previous payments that have been made. I was just wondering how that works, because presumably those are payments that have been made that have probably already been spent on costs of care and that sort of thing.
Martin. I'll call it Richard have a go.
So it's a mixture of what we call direct payments and 100 hours. 100 hours is where we provide a payment to parents to have a PA for 2 hours a week. I think there's occasions where either through direct payments or 100 hours where parents haven't been able to recruit or spend the money and therefore built up a considerable sum in a bank account, as well as making sure that we have a much tighter governance on that spend. I think it's probably fair to say, or even possibly controversially, but that 100 hours was introduced along with many other local authorities around something called aiming high for disabled children, which was probably 10 years ago now. The majority of authorities, when that money disappeared because it was government investment that wasn't continued, those types of services which are very early help, very universal, they disappear with it. So that's what we're looking at, is an overall look at the service to make sure that it is delivering the best value, as well as ensuring that the money that we are providing is done so with an appropriate assessment and appropriate governance and oversight.
So people who have already been receiving payments who so far maybe haven't had to provide receipts or invoices will be asked to retrospectively, and if they can't evidence the money being spent how it was supposed to, they might be required to pay it back.
So where there's money that has gone into an account that is not being used, it's effectively not the money for the receiver to keep. So that money is brought back to us, and I think mainly has been done already.
Yeah, I think that work on that initial review of those balances is complete or just about complete. I'm thinking the mitigation, just see if there's a figure, I think of £200,000 we were expecting to get back. I mean, it'll probably be a slightly different figure to that, the final one, but that's what we're estimating at this stage, is a 200,000. That's a one-off retention back, so that doesn't affect, at that point, that particular part of the review doesn't affect the ongoing payments, but I think that's something that looking at as well, isn't it?
Cool. Lovely. Move on. Thank you, Richard. Oh, sorry. Oh, that's all right.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry.
I also had a question about paragraph 22 on page 12, about writing off a deficit balance of about £150,000 following the conversion of a school from, I assume, from local authority to control to academy status. I'm sorry, I'm not usually on this committee and I'm not very familiar with how that process works of schools becoming academies, but is that common for there to be a write-off deficit?
It is in a school in this situation. So this is a school that's had an Ofsted inspection that's then meant that there's been a direction for it to convert to an academy. So this is not a school that's voluntarily at that point chosen to convert. In that situation, when the school converts, and these schools tend to be schools that then have financial difficulties as well. The two things often go hand in hand. Either the school's having difficulty managing its budget and managing other issues, or they're spending lots of money to try and deal with some of those other issues. They often end up in that deficit position on their revenue budget. And the legal position is that that balance has to be written off by the local authority at the point that school transfers to the academy. So it starts with a clean slate. If it wasn't a DfE directed a conversion, so the school was voluntarily converting to an academy and it had a deficit, it would take that deficit with it. It wouldn't be written off.
It seems like quite a large amount of money to have to write off. What sort of time period did that build up over?
I think this particular one has probably built up over a 3-year period. Clearly, I think that it is a difficult position, because once a school is in that position and it's on the pathway to convert, the levers that we've got in terms of the local authority then to try and rein in expenditure and ensure that they're not continuing to overspend against their budget are relatively limited. I mean, ultimately we could withdraw delegation from that school, but that's probably not helpful in that situation for it. So we're in a difficult position as a local authority, because the usual things that we would do with the school to try and help it manage its budget and bring that budget back into line disappear as it's going through the route of conversion. So it is a genuinely a difficult position. You do tend to see that schools in that position, the deficit will creep up more than it might have done otherwise in those months during the conversion process, or as that's developing.
So does that mean that this overspend and, you know, the council having to write it off was, you know, kind of factored into the budget because you could see it coming, or has it been a surprise overspend?
We wouldn't have budgeted for that. It's a general fund cost. It doesn't get charged against the school's budget. That's the other thing. We're not allowed to charge it against the school's budget. It has to go against the general fund budget. So no, we wouldn't budget for that in the general fund. So it is an additional one-off cost in the year that we're going to have to fund.
Can I just add to that, that it seems just shocking and dysfunctional that government directive means that schools are forced to convert to academies, but local authorities are forced to bear the brunt of the costs. Just feel like I really wanted to say that on the record.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go on, let Peter go. Richard go, sorry. There you go. Thank you, Richard. See you next quarter. Jane's up next. Welcome, Jane.
So for those that haven't met me before, I'm Jane Murrt. I'm Head of Community Safety here in City of York Council, and part of my role is to support Safer York Partnership. And I'll allow John to introduce himself.
I'm John Alwood. I'm standing in for Fran Norton at the minute, so I'm Superintendent for York and Selby.
Okay, so I'll introduce the paper. So this is the biannual report of Safer York Partnership. So this is in relation to the strategy 2023 to 26. So just a slight bit of background that you've got at paragraph 1.1. This is the statutory community safety partnership for the city, and the partners are listed within that paragraph. The strategy is produced every 3 years. It's then refreshed annually so that it takes account of any issues that arise during that period, any new legislation that comes out that falls within the community safety arena. But it is generally a 3-year strategy. So the remainder of the report takes you through each of the priorities that are listed within the strategy, and I did share the strategy itself with you, so you will have seen that and hopefully will be familiar with that. I'm not intending to go through everything because I think you've probably already, well, hopefully you've all read it and digested it fully. So if anyone's got any questions, then I'm happy to take them.
Questions? Who wants to kick off? Councillor Manning.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for coming and presenting this report. I just had a question about hate crime. In the report, you've listed all the protected characteristics when you're dealing with hate crime. I know that gender isn't a protected characteristic under hate crime law, but is there a reason why it isn't listed as one of the characteristics that you know, what a type of hate crime you try to prevent anyway? I noticed in the report it says you do record non-hate crime incidents and review them as well. Does that include gender-based hate crimes?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of gender, we do, my apologies. Also a rookie mistake. Yeah, we do record gender hate crime. If that answers your question in a very, very simple way. There's a number of, obviously, all of the protected characteristics as well as gender. I would say that hate crime is obviously one of the focuses that we have in North Yorkshire. And as much as the actual service we give, because everybody gets the best possible service we can, what it does get as well is greater scrutiny around that to make sure that things are done correctly and that we are supporting those particular communities. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is, wherever possible, is to increase the confidence in reporting, because it is, I'm sure you'll agree, an underreported area.
Can I just a supplementary on that? So, because Councillor Melly and I had a bit of a conversation about this beforehand, because we were both a bit independently, just a bit surprised really to see. So page 71, you know, the Hate Crime Partnership Action Plan. North Yorkshire Police has recognised misogyny as a hate crime since 2017. That's really welcome. It was, I think, if not it was certainly one of the first police forces to do that, and that's absolutely right. But it doesn't seem to be reflected in this strategy action plan here. And there's really important opportunities, I think, that potentially get missed, because there's some really good stuff in here. So don't get me wrong, like, you know, lots of the stuff around hate crime is good, and you know, working in schools and all of that sort of thing. But as a former governor, the biggest issue that we faced in schools was actually around the Andrew Tate stuff, the misogyny. This is in a primary school. It's coming down to year 5 and year 6. I know in secondary schools it is even more of a concern for people. And I think sometimes what worries me with some of the stuff around this is that we end up talking about things that are very, very important. I absolutely don't want to diminish whether it's racism or whether it's transphobia or whatever it might be, but actually just gender-based and particularly, you know, the sort of misogyny and violence is so prevalent, and it affects such a number of people in the community. It feels odd to not see it reflected within this strategy, and I suppose seeking some reassurance that thought has been given to it, and that perhaps there's another strategy or there's something else somewhere else that does pick up that issue, because it's such a big issue.
Okay. I'm fairly certain it is picked up by the Hate Crime Partnership, but obviously I can take that back and check that that is the case and feed back your comments to them, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I would support that. I kind of, before reading this report, tried to have a think about what, from being involved in my local communities and my local community groups and areas, trying to think what residents have told me are the main issues of community safety. And, you know, most of that was picked up in this report and in this strategy, like domestic violence, antisocial behaviour and racism and homophobia. But yeah, I think gender-based violence and hate crimes, and when we're talking about communities and what people face in terms of safety in their communities, I think gender-based violence that isn't domestic violence, isn't someone in their home or their family or their partner, but just in the street, sexual harassment or sexual abuse, sexual assault is really prevalent and one of the main issues when it comes to community safety, certainly in the communities I represent. So I was surprised to not see it explicitly in the strategy.
You're right, it probably isn't listed specifically, but I can tell you that there is quite a lot of work that goes on around some of those issues. So there's all of the work that goes on in relation to violence against women and girls, which there is a whole separate strategy for with community safety, there are, you know, multiple strategies that feed into this process that we have to take into consideration as well. Plus, I am aware of work that's being undertaken in relation to some of the issues that you've outlined that have been brought to our attention through the nighttime economy, for example. So, you know, where we pick up that there are patterns, trends and issues that are occurring from any community safety topic, they will be picked up. But there is, you know, if we try to sort of draw a chart of all of the groups that meet and discuss some of these issues, it will become quite complex. It gets quite tricky. And I think it's fair to say that when we were putting together the strategy, we had some of these discussions in the board, particularly when we had a development day specifically to look at the strategy itself. It's very difficult to determine whether you create a, you know, 200-300 page document containing absolutely everything, or whether you summarize some things. I think the important thing is to keep raising those issues and to raise those issues with us so that we can then cross-check that they are being picked up. And then it means that when I come back and give subsequent reports to you, I can include some of the information, case studies and data around those issues.
Thanks. Jane, where does exploitation online come? Sexual exploitation online is a big thing in schools, that I think we all know. But I'm not quite sure where it comes in your paperwork. That would also, I think, hopefully cover things like modern slavery and even county lines. I wonder if you could just give us a word about that.
Yes, so again, it's another topic that fits across a number of areas that we work in. So we link in very closely with some of the existing multi-agency partnership groups that sit within Martin's directorate around children's social care. So there are very strong links between the social care teams, the safeguarding teams, and the work that we do within community safety. We will always cross-check back with safeguarding to make sure that any safeguarding concern that's raised through community safety is on the radar of the appropriate teams and the appropriate officers, whether they be within North Yorkshire Police or within our own council services. Again, it's, you know, this is the complexity of community safety, is it, you know, it covers so much, it becomes almost, you know, overwhelming to try and feed all of the information that you require. So again, you know, as you sort of track through the scrutiny process, what I would urge you to do is to identify those areas where you want to know a little bit more, and then perhaps ask for some, you know, specific thematic reports to come on some of those topics. And then obviously we can make sure we bring the right partners here to speak from informed capacity, because obviously, although I've got head of community safety as my portfolio, I dip in and out of all sorts of arenas, and I'm not an expert in absolutely everything.
Yes. So does your team or somebody else give advice to schools? I'm not going to say give advice to teachers, because teachers are not the solution to everything and wouldn't want to be. But do you give advice to schools if a school says it's got a particular problem with sexual exploitation over the internet? Is that how it works, or do they have to call somebody else, another team?
Okay, so again, it's quite a tricky question to answer. So for example, sometimes exploitation and internet usage and the vulnerability of what young people are accessing on the internet rears its head, particularly through the prevent process, so through the channel process quite often. So in those instances, then we would directly refer on to provide that support that's required, working through directly the school. From a community safety perspective, we link in very closely with the school liaison officers that the police have. So again, they will be providing a lot of that information, and where we pick up on issues that are arising, we will use the school's liaison officers to provide some of that input, which they do quite creatively through, you know, a combination of sort of education, but also through games and things that appeal more to young people.
Yeah, I think just to add as well that there's a great deal of advice, support for professionals and non-professionals through the Safeguarding Partnership. So it would be through our Children's Safeguarding Partnership website that school would find that information.
Thank you. I'd like to sort of ask about particularly the safe and supported communities strand of the strategy. I think the strategy is great and is all the right things. But I guess my questions were more around implementation, because what I see in the strategy, it made me question what I then have seen happening in practice. I'm aware that, for example, so our local PC, who is brilliant, as is the rest of our local team, we're very lucky to have an absolutely fantastic local team, and you can tell them that. But I know that our local PC has, on a number of occasions, tried to kind of get set up and going again, a multi-agency meeting that happens regularly, where we've got housing officers from the council, NEOs, you know, representatives from the police, talking about key issues, key people that might be appearing on everyone's caseloads, doing that joined up thing. And I know that he's struggled to get that to happen, or managed to get it to happen once with really good outcomes, not managed to get it happening regularly. Whereas if you kind of read this strategy, it would suggest that that's the way the city is working. But in sort of my small and limited experience, it just doesn't seem that that is the way the city is working, even though it's brilliant and it's how we want to work. And I suppose linked to that, it surprised me to see all those mentions of the ward committees, because while I know that our PCs and our police team do their best to attend our ward committees, there's not since we were elected in May, as far as I'm aware, we've not had a sort of sit down with the Safer York partnership to say, right, your ward committees are a key part of our strategy to get information out. I'm not aware that. I kind of thought, you know, the police come along, as do other organisations, as that kind of community meeting. But I suppose I was surprised to see it in your strategy, because I thought there would have been something a bit more directed to us as ward councillors if our ward committees are such key parts of it. Would love to be, happy to be, glad to see it in the strategy. How do we make it work better in practice, basically?
Yes, this is a priority for us, so it's an ambition, and this is how we want to work. And we've taken some time to actually craft this document. I think this is a fairly recent finish discussion. Our challenge is that these are one-year strategies, that you will see this more and more. And what was previously involved in the communities bit was much more about crime and how we were dealing with the impacts of crime in communities, rather than the prevention and early intervention. So this is very much around getting on the front foot, and, you know, clear hole build and all of those other initiatives that we're doing will build into that. So this is very much an ambition. So if you're volunteering, we'll try and get something going wherever we can, set some examples. That sits alongside neighbourhood action planning. Obviously, the communities are identifying themselves what their priorities are around safer communities. And again, we're trialing all of that to see if it's working. So this is very much where we want to be.
Brilliant. In that case, it's a great strategy. Let's make it work in real life. And yeah, absolutely volunteering. You know, if we're part of this strategy, it's, you know, let's be part of this strategy. And yeah, very happy to see us on there.
Okay, just to add really to what Pauline said, and to just sort of add into the mix, what I would say is that we are very responsive within community safety when problems occur within communities. So we have processes in place. So I have a daily discussion with the MPT inspectors, which also includes, you know, other colleagues as well within the team, where we will pick up on anything that's sort of bubbling and start to put in place some sort of problem solving process. Sometimes that might just be existing work that's being done through normal policing, normal work that, for example, the neighbourhood enforcement team might be doing. Sometimes we'll pull together a multi-agency problem solving meeting specifically because a problem has reared its head that we need to get on top of. And when we feel that we need to be working directly with communities within that process, we do so. So we will come out and speak to residents. We will attend community meetings. The difficulty that I have is that I don't have a big team. So the capacity to be able to do that as an ongoing preemptive process just isn't there. But we are very responsive when problems do start to occur. So just to provide that level of reassurance to you.
Thank you. And I guess it comes down to there's different layers of problems, isn't it? Isn't there? And with your limitations and your team, I appreciate, but I think perhaps those very ultra local problems in a specific street, in a specific issue, maybe aren't then making it into those briefings because you've got the whole city. So I suppose it's how we can find a way of those receiving that as well. But thank you.
Councillor Crawshaw and Councillor Knight.
Thanks, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of pick up on some of that. First of all, a really specific request. So page 52, which is within Annex B on the community safety strategy. There's a list of all the contributing groups to the city centre strategy. A good chunk of the city centre is also Micklegate Ward. So it's great that you spoke to my Guildhall Ward colleagues, I presume, before the last election, because I think the current Guildhall Ward team haven't been spoken to, and I think would welcome some input too. But as I say, at least a third of the city centre, I think, would be Micklegate. So if we could have some involvement there as well, that would be really helpful. And then just to sort of pick up on some of the points that Councillor Nelson was making. I mean, first of all, to give praise really in terms of going back probably 3 or 4 years ago now, but we did do that multidisciplinary approach around some significant issues that we had in the ward. It was really fantastic to have everybody together, and I think the community really welcomed seeing that. So we had some joint going out on the streets, we did regular meetings, and I think we felt that really helped to get on top of some quite significant problems. I think what we've experienced since then, and it possibly is some of what you're talking about in terms of at what point you can and can't get involved. We have then had some frustrations where, as ward councillors and even as PCSOs on the ground, we've been starting to pick up, you know, I'm sure we'll all know there are some names, if you start to hear that name in your area, you know that some bother is perhaps going to follow. And it hasn't always been clear how to just feed in. So I'm not necessarily saying that we would immediately start the whole multidisciplinary team thing back up again, but almost being able to go, you know what, I'm picking up that this name is back here, or this particular address where we've had some problems before seems to be problems building up again. And it's just how we can feed in. So page 36, you talk about the fortnightly early intervention and prevention meetings. As ward councillors, as PCSOs right down on the ground, how can we feed up when we're getting that joint bits of information that are corroborating, that say we're going to have a problem if this doesn't get picked up? And that's the one bit that I feel is missing from the experience that we've had in Micklegate Ward.
I can respond to that. So first of all, when you do pick up those issues, you can always drop me an email and let me know, and I will feed it into the right appropriate process. But we've also recently, within the Community Safety Hub, we've divided the city into areas, and we're now holding area meetings on a weekly basis. Those involve the local area coordinators, they involve housing, they involve the police, they involve my staff within the neighbourhood enforcement and ASB teams, where we are starting to discuss some of those emerging issues. And it's only been up and running since Christmas. It's very new. It's chaired by the sergeant within my team, has been very well received so far. And I think that will sort of fill some of that gap really in terms of picking up on those issues much more quickly. We're aligning those meetings to ensure that they coincide with when the neighbourhood policing teams are working, so that we've always got representation from the right officers, and they know that they can bring individuals or addresses that they're concerned about to those meetings. So I think as sort of time goes on, you should start to see that working well. It's early days yet.
Sorry, so I appreciate that we can come to you. I think perhaps a thing to seek to build in then, rather than everything coming just through yourself, is if there's a route by which ward councillors can feed in, whether that's through a local area coordinator, whether that's through the NPT, you know, whoever it is, just that clarity, because we pick up things that perhaps don't always get, you know, So it's just how we pass that bit of information on sometimes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just a supplementary comment really to Councillor Nelson's observations. The Police, Fire and Crime panel has been looking very specifically at the significance of community policing and neighbourhood policing and PCSOs in particular. And I'm just reporting back here that I was very pleased when we were interviewing the new Chief Constable, who will be coming in place very soon. That was a priority for him. We pushed it a lot at the rural and the urban level, because of course it's very easy to forget that they are different. And I just think it's important to note that he was very, very keen to stress that this was a priority. So hopefully we will see, and we will continue to monitor that, keep an eye. And obviously there's the change with the new combined authority, which will be taking on police, fire and crime. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. So just to reassure you that we'll keep that fire burning.
I think I've got that on. Yeah, just to offer a bit of reassurance of should anyone wish to supply information or some intelligence like that, you know, to the police. The local MPT is probably the best forum, the local MPT inspectors, who I am assured, unless you were going to tell me differently now, link in with all their ward councillors on a regular basis. Please tell me if they don't. But that is another avenue. Now, here we go. Yes, but that is another avenue as well. And they should be linking in with yourselves. If not, then other supervision and we are working towards trying to attend the council meetings as well. Now, it's aspirational because obviously we have a lot high workload, and I understand everybody has capacity issues. But like I say, our ambition is that we do link in with the councils, particularly at community meetings. So, and again, I'm probably going to get shot down here again, but I can see the assassin. Okay, no. And I know in Selby they do attempt to get to all of the council meetings. However, I'm told in York it's by invitation. So should you wish the police to attend? So in some ways, I'm using this as a bit of a reality check for myself here as well. That is what I'm being told, but
It is, yes. I'm going to say here in a public meeting, the invitation is always open for any of our police colleagues to turn up to public meetings. And what I would say is I think it's really, really challenging for colleagues in the police because they've got so much to be doing. Turning up to that public meeting can be quite difficult for them. I think one of the challenges is maybe not linking in with sort of our community officers that well to sort of say this is when the public meeting is happening and not knowing whether the police are going to turn up or not is the issue. So you get to public meeting. I'd love to be able to, if I say to my community, the police person, whoever that is definitely going to be here, I will get attendance at that meeting. But of course, I can't say that. And therefore, it's a bit of chicken and egg, really, isn't it? So I think there's something around that that I'd like feeding back. Because I think it's great. It's almost that ambition would be better than sort of turning up to random public meetings, random community meetings, just saying, I'm going to make sure that there is someone at this particular one in this particular area. That will be really, really helpful. Because when members of the police do turn up, it's really well received and they are fantastic and they're very, very professional, and there is an opportunity to provide feedback and they can provide intelligence and vice versa, and that works really, really well. But it is, you know, due to everyone's constraints, the consistency of turning up, and I think that's what I'd feedback.
Take that on board. Thank you.
So hopefully I'm going to give you something slightly positive, but with a tweak. No, sorry. Of course, it was positive. It was positive. Sorry, yeah, wasn't meaning that in your way. Building on the positivity. I think the experience we've had in Micklegate is actually, when we've got to know the inspectors, we've had really great relationships with them, and likewise with sergeants and PCs, and in particular a couple of PCSOs, and actually we have had the experience of, you know, for example, with racecourse type meetings where we've booked, you know, good way in advance, and on occasion we've had 2 or 3 people turn up, which is great. What the bit that we find that misses out is once you've got somebody in post, you can build a relationship with them. What you don't ever seem to find out is when a sergeant's moved on or when an inspector's moved on, and so you can sometimes be thinking that you're sending information into a person that actually is no longer in that post, or doesn't necessarily say to you, oh, I've moved over to such and such a station and this is who you need to speak to. So I know you've got millions and millions of things to be doing, so you know we're down, you know, low on the priority order in one sense, but if there's a mechanism by which we can just be kept updated when there's a change, particularly sergeants and inspectors, so that we know that we're emailing to the right people, that's just a little bit of the loop that we need closing up.
Personally, I would totally agree with you. And my understanding, although now you're telling me that, I'm going to take that back and have a word, would be that all of my MPT colleagues have a list of the key individual network that they should be engaging with on a regular basis, and that should be maintained. And actually, if we do have that movement, then obviously that stays with the actual role. And the first thing that I would expect any new inspector or sergeant to do would be to actually go through that list. Now, if that's not happening, I'll take that back.
Some of them have been really proactive, and others you find out that they're not there. So it just doesn't feel like it's an entirely robust system, I suppose. Right. Is
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. The report looks at city centre, and that's quite a distinct entity in terms of issues faced, and the information that's provided there. What was the rationale for moving Purple Flag's responsibility to the bids?
Purple Flag tends to sit with bids in other parts of the country, mainly because it's owned by the business community then, as opposed to being owned by the local authority. So that was the sort of rationale behind moving it under the bid.
Right, okay. Just following on previous discussions, we did have Capable Guardian, which was a very good interdisciplinary format for discussing issues when they became hotspots, but also to ensure that there was that regular connection between organisations to try and nip in the bud any issues, and I'd be delighted to see that return. But I think what that also looks at doing is ensuring that the local information on criminal damage, public disorder, theft and antisocial behaviour is being provided on a localised basis. I appreciate as councillors we get a monthly update, but it'd be helpful to have that contextualised across the city to be able to see, well, yes, there are, for instance, motorbike thefts have been popping up all over the place, and with the community messaging, you can sort of see that there's a pattern emerging. But as the nights get lighter, there is concerns within the community that this will result in more antisocial behaviour, because it has in previous years, and some years there's more that happens because of the warmth, and others less. But it's anticipating that and ensuring that that information is available. And I'd say that the PCSO team are very helpful in keeping in touch. But I think it's important that just have to flag up 101. I did ring it on Sunday afternoon. It took 39 minutes to get through. And I thought if 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, it's under pressure, it does start to worry me, because as ward councillors, we're all encouraged to get people to ring 101 to make sure incidents are reported, because that affects the way in which resources are allocated within the police. But if there's a disincentive, and the reason I rang 101 is that when I was going to do it online, it popped up, actually, we would like you to ring 101, because of the nature of what it was. And so I did. So it's really working with the public to make sure that you've got all of that data, and that the information is coming back to a group of people who can help to shape a response, so the community feels part of that response.
Okay, so obviously 101 is national. It's not something that's, you know, and I think over the years we've had many debates about 101 and the length of time it takes to answer calls, etc. We would still always advise people to use 101 or online reporting. It's through that information that comes through in that way that we pick up through our daily discussions on everything that's happened in the previous 24 hours. And that's what enables us to be looking at those patterns and trends that are building. Because we've got those meetings in place, and those meetings are set up both with the daily meetings, then the weekly ones, and then obviously the fortnightly one, which is specifically around county lines. It's giving us a much greater opportunity to get on top of things and nip them in the bud. Much better than we've had previously, where we've had to sort of wait for crime statistics to feed through, someone to do the number crunching and then provide us with that data. So we've got those discussions going with live data all of the time. And that does then enable us to have those conversations as to whether we need to be doing something right now, what that looks like, and who we need to involve. So yes, I totally appreciate, you know, what you're saying. But again, I would always, and I'm sure John would advocate, to use 101.
Yeah, absolutely. The 101 system, obviously, I would suggest that it is the best form to answer, and I appreciate it's taking you 39 minutes on this particular occasion. What I will say, just to give you a little bit of reassurance, that has got to be an outlier, because every morning meeting that I go on within North Yorkshire Police, the call handling statistics are thoroughly reviewed. So I accept what you say totally, but I would like to think that that is an outlier, because the data that I hear, you know, although it probably deals in averages, the usual sort of kind of time is nowhere near 39 minutes, is what I would say. So, but accepting what you say. But please be reassured, the scrutiny that goes into our sort of ability to answer calls, if you like, through that national system for them to come to us is very much under scrutiny. And it was part of, obviously, our HMIC inspection as well, which we are waiting for the latest update at the minute.
Cool. Councillor Pavlovich. Then Councillor next.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with the 101. As Councillor Knight will attest, you know, we regularly look at the data in respect of 101, and it has been improving. It's still not good enough, and one of the concerns I think most people have is about people giving up on reporting incidents, and then all the meetings in the world aren't really going to help much when people say, oh, well, you know, I saw some kids doing this, or I saw an adult doing that, and I wanted to report it, but by the time I'd done it, you know, the perpetrators had gone home, had their tea, and were safely tucked up in bed. And that has been my, you know, just to say, Councillor Waller's experience. You know, I was witnessing an offence at the time. It wasn't the most serious offence in the world. It didn't warrant a 999 call, but it was low-level vandalism. You know, somebody kicking a bush shelter, kicking a phone box in, and it was just, you know, well, I'm waiting to report this, and it's just not happening. But it is getting better. And so, you know, where we were 2 or 3 years ago, we are not there now. And so certainly the PFCC has invested in the control room quite markedly, haven't they? And in respect of Purple Flag, I was out with the Purple Flag assessors on Friday, and I have to say, the BID who hosted the event and did the presentation, we had a police sergeant, I think, was it, or inspector?
Chief Inspector.
Oh, Chief Inspector, Jesus.
Rob Campbell.
Well, I could never work out what the pips all mean. Chief Inspector, wow. Well, he was great. And James Gilchrist was there, Matt Boxall was there, I was there, I think it was safe to say they were very impressed by the presentation that the BID did. And one of the reasons why the BID are dealing with it was reflected in the last BID application, but also that there was a disconnect between the sense that the council were owning it when it was really about supporting businesses and the economy of the city. I think you want to come back to on that.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for the information on the Purple Flag. I think it's would be helpful for us to get for the next report the analysis, and because the reason I raised it is that, you know, every so often I will read 101 rather than report it online, just so that I experience, public are experiencing, and that over the years there have been times when there's been a very rapid response as a result of actions that have been taken, and then it sort of tails off a bit, and then there's action. So it's just understanding if this is an outlier, and perfectly willing to accept that. It's just that as a ward councillor, you get all sorts of messages. You don't actually know how long the person sending the message to was on the phone. Sometimes they may have been, sometimes they probably won't. And therefore it's just understanding what they're telling me as a ward councillor, their experience of 101 is, and it would be helpful to have some analysis to go through that, so that, because at the end of the day, we all want people to use that service so that you've got the information, and preferably as currently as possible.
Thank you. For fear of slightly going back to what we were discussing before around police staffing, it just made me, and around police staff moving on and things like that, something that I'm aware of, or through, well, discussions with our local sergeant, I think, we've had discussions about how it's my understanding that kind of there's been a policy shift around trying to keep teams working in the same areas and keep that consistency of staff in local areas. Obviously, there'll always be some movement, but from what I understand of the situation, there used to be a lot of movement and people used to move between areas a lot more, and there's a lot more of a kind of move towards like teams based in areas and those sergeants not moving on to other areas, you know, on a kind of rotation and things like that. Firstly, is that correct as part of the policing strategy? But secondly, if that is, actually that's something that probably wants to be coming out of, like, evident in this strategy as well, it seems to me, because that's quite a key sort of change that's been made to support the delivery of community policing, if I've understood that correctly and remembered that correctly.
For me, the supervisors have each been given a certain area, and that is their area of responsibility. And that is, if you like, their focus. However, what I will say is, so there isn't this movement round, you kind of imply a bit of a cyclic, you will every so often move round. That is not in place. So each of the supervisors have a certain area, but that is not to say that should another area require some focus, that they would not move there, and actually, because of the threat and risk that's potentially there, action is needed.
I completely understand that. I suppose it's more of a, my understanding was that generally in terms of the kind of delivery of community policing, one of the things that was a part of this is keeping, you know, sergeants and PCs and PCSOs with it. Like, obviously they will go to other areas where they'll go wherever they're needed. I think they went up to Scarborough at one point for a big event. I seem to remember someone mentioning, but I guess my point is more strategically, that seems like a really great thing that's happening. And it seems like a very purposeful thing that you've got a sergeant in an area with a team, and there's no intention of them moving around to other areas. In terms of the previous sergeant left and went elsewhere, and then we've now got our current sergeant, and there's no expectation that he's going to move and become the sergeant of another area, in my understanding. I feel like I'm not making any sense. It seems really sensible to have community teams based in the community with an intention that they will stay in the community, and we want to avoid that staff turnover and kind of avoid people moving into other areas for no reason.
Yeah, I think.
Is that a strategy? And if it is, should that be in this strategy as part of the way that we're planning on delivering?
I know what you're talking, I know what you mean. Okay, so if I reflect back, I've been here over 20 years in this role, so I've seen lots of different models of community policing over that time. And during that time, you know, there have been occasions when there's been an awful lot of movement within the police. I think, you know, two things that you have to bear in mind is obviously, you know, the police is a rank-based structure, so you're never going to stop people from going for promotion, and that will by default move some people on. With the role of PCSOs, quite often PCSOs come because they want to get experience to become police officers. So we lose a few, you know, like that. At the moment, I mean, you know, certainly the outer York inspector has been in place for a long time, probably one of the longest that I've experienced. And, you know, certainly I think, you know, John is probably something like the 16th or 17th area commander I've worked with over that 20 years. So that just shows, you know, what that movement can look like. I think the main thing, you know, some of the things that I've picked up from this discussion in this meeting is the importance of making sure that areas know who they're linking in with, that they've got those generic email addresses that they can make contact with their local neighbourhood teams, and that, you know, I'm sure John will take back the request that, you know, they make sure that when they move on, they pass on that information and update lists accordingly. But I think, you know, it would be unfair to say that we'll have complete stability, and I wouldn't want to reflect something in a strategy that we can't commit to for 3 years. And bearing in mind, you know, as we've said, we've got a new chief constable coming in. He may have ideas about how he sees neighbourhood policing being delivered once he's, you know, bedded in and got used to how things are working. So take on board what you're saying, know exactly what you're trying to get across. The important thing for me is those local relationships and making sure that people do know who to talk to.
Thank you for making it sound like I asked a coherent question.
Sorry, I was going to contribute something to the 101 debate, but it's fine, we moved on.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, in the community safety strategy, one of the measures of success is an increase in referrals to the Prevent Channel panel. I was a bit concerned when I read that, because I think we've probably all heard stories of like completely non-violent political campaigners being referred to Prevent, you know, environmental campaigners and animal rights campaigners. And we know that disproportionately people of colour and Muslims are referred to Prevent. And so, yeah, I'm just concerned about an increase in number of people being referred being seen as a success, when actually it can have the opposite impact. It can divide communities and alienate people and isolate people and sow divisions in communities. And it, you know, if there are fewer people vulnerable to radicalisation and vulnerable to extremism, then fewer people being referred to prevent isn't a lack of success. It probably actually is a success. So I just such a kind of blunt measure, I find actually quite deeply concerning to see that there in the strategy as a measure of success.
Okay, so in relation to prevent, our response to the prevent duty is monitored by the Home Office. So that's one of their measures, is referrals into the channel process. Now, I think, you know, what people have to focus on is the fact that a referral into prevent does not mean that that person will rock up in the channel panel. And whilst we do see lots of referrals to prevent in York, very, very few actually do get through to the channel panel. And then once they're into that process, then obviously the discussions are focused around supporting that individual and understanding, you know, the information relating to why that referral has been made. So I wouldn't be overly concerned by it. It's a measure that we are, you know, asked to record by the Home Office, and it's something that the Home Office do record. But what I can say is that our prevent referral process is very robust. We only bring cases into channel where there are really serious concerns, and they are few and far between.
Go on then.
Sorry, just to pick up though. So again, is this also then a Home Office? Because so of the 5 bullet points, third one is increase the number of referrals, but then the 4th one is to increase the number of cases that are adopted and dealt with through channel. So notwithstanding what you've just said there, there's a target that is saying that they want more people to go through that process.
Yeah. So
and is that coming from external to us? Because I think I would share some concerns if we're driving, you know,
yes,
if that's because it is a very blunt outcome.
It's not a locally driven target. Again, what I would say, it's one of those issues where, you know, when you look at the picture nationally, you will see much higher rate of cases on channel panels in some parts of the country. We're not, you know, within that arena. So you know, my response back to the Home Office is always, our channel figures reflect the reality of what goes on in the city and what we consider as professionals to be appropriate to be bringing into the channel process. Because of the severity of the consequences that can occur if we were to miss something. And as we know, there have been instances nationally, not locally, but nationally, where individuals have been referred into the prevent process, have been known to channel panels, but have still gone on to commit serious terrorist offences. It's a risk that we can't ignore. So I would rather professionals working, you know, in those frontline services were referring their concerns in the first instance, having those conversations, because we then do have a very rigorous process of risk assessing to then determine whether or not those concerns are sufficient to be bringing into the channel process. Our channel panel has been regarded by the Home Office as particularly good. We've had, you know, we had a visit in November where, you know, we sat down with the channel panel with the Home Office, and they were very positive about the way that we run things. So I think we have pretty much got it right, but the consequences of getting it wrong are obviously quite significant.
If I may just quickly, and thank you, that's helpful feedback. I think, you know, probably we'd all understand that the balancing of risk in all of these situations is you know, difficult, and I guess some of what's behind, you know, what the opening of this particular part of the discussion was about is about, you know, that difference between the harm that is caused to communities who are disproportionately referred into a system versus the harm that an individual could potentially you know, cause. Given that these are the I was going to say DFE then, but you know, the Home Office sort of directed measures, are we also ourselves collecting information or making sure that we're aware of whether or not we're making referrals that are what we're doing to safeguard to ensure that we're not disproportionately referring particular communities, or where we are perhaps doing so, are we investigating what might be the cause of that and how we can seek to mitigate that?
Okay, so I chair the channel panel. So obviously I've got that sort of overview from a community safety perspective, as well as having that channel responsibility. I mean, I think, one of the things to remember is that channel is not a process of criminalisation. So it sits outside of that. It's voluntary as well. So when individuals, when somebody refers into channel, that process is not putting that person into the criminal domain, unless the severity of the information that then subsequently comes out is such that we then have to move them into police-led space, and that's a whole different thing. But as far as we are in York, yes, we do look at the nature of referrals. The Prevent Partnership Board that sits across York and North Yorkshire also looks at the nature of referrals that we're getting across both York and North Yorkshire. And I certainly wouldn't have any concerns that we are disproportionately targeting any individual groups or any particular issues in the city at all. All of the concerns that have come through to our channel panel have been legitimate concerns, and the majority of them are dismissed out of the channel process pretty quickly.
Thank you. Cool.
Thank you. Just my comments. I love the report because it had how will success be measured, which Emily knows I love. But most of the questions weren't answered. And your report, you put down also, as somebody's picked up, increasing traffic into the city centre. If it's a blue badge, we'd welcome that. So some of these measures, not necessarily, it doesn't say how you're measuring. And the other question is, I noticed from the annex, you meet in October and March, and a short answer, because we've got to discuss our work plan for the next year. Is this the best months for you to come to see us? Should we see you before you do your plans, or should we see you to report on your plans?
Okay, so the terms of reference are slightly out of date. So we have actually changed, and we are meeting on a quarterly basis. So the meetings take place in March, June, October and December. So we will, so we can fit around whatever works best for you as a committee when you want those reports to come. In relation to the performance framework, that's not fully in place, and I'm very conscious of that at the moment. As we've already said, it took a long time to get the strategy approved. We had a lot of change within the membership of the board. We had difficulty in getting meetings to get people together to really discuss in detail the content of it, and it's so important that we get that absolutely right. The next phase for me now is really to go away and take all of those indicators and start to look at how we pull them together, and I'll be working with the business intelligence unit to do that. I haven't had the opportunity to do that piece of work yet, because not all of the data is obviously held by us within the council. Some of it's coming in from the police, some of it's coming through from other partners as well, so it has to be collated into that process. But the next time we bring a report to you, it should have a performance matrix attached to it, which should mirror what you're seeing in the document. But I am conscious of that.
Very quickly. Come on, Cass.
Sorry, quick question in case you hadn't noticed it. Have the terms of reference also been updated to make sure to incorporate the changes to the regional mayor and the police and crime commissioner and that sort of thing, to ensure that when we do have a mayor in place, they will be involved? They're more, whoever's deputised to deal with the police commissioning, fire commissioning.
So at the moment, we tend to look at the terms of reference annually. So we haven't done that yet. And I have deliberately not done it yet, because until those changes take place, we don't want to be continually working to an out-of-date terms of reference. So we're aware of what's coming. We're aware of what we need to be putting in there, and they will be changed. We do that process annually anyway.
Great. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
No, that's the first of 3 items. You can go. You can both go. Get lost.
Thanks, boss.
Welcome. Who's kicking off?
Me.
Good. So off you go, Joe.
Excuse me. Evening. So yes, you have Neil and I with you this evening to talk you through the youth strategy report that you have in front of you. So the report provides an update on the plans to develop a youth strategy for the city. Key purpose of the strategy is to develop a new local landscape of how the council and providers of youth services are intending to work in partnership in the city. And the report also provides a summary of some of the youth provision that exists in the city at the moment and the resources that we have available to us. It responds to some revised statutory guidance as well for local authorities around how we should be approaching the delivery of youth provision. So Neil's going to talk us through the process we've been going through to date, and then I'm going to deliver the second half of that.
So I'll give you the short version in terms of the work around developing the strategy, conscious of time. We've worked really closely with partners. The main actors in delivery of youth provision locally are in the voluntary and community sector. And as you'll note in the paper, we've got already an informal network that exists, largely to bring people together to share some ideas and information. But as helpful as it is, it's relatively loose when you look at some other areas. In response to some of the statutory guidance that Joe has mentioned, we've done work with those partners facilitated by the Regional Youth Work Unit to look at, is there a better way that we can do this? And the short answer is that there probably is. Local youth partnerships is something that has been emergent in other areas, and particularly supported by an organisation called the Young People's Foundation, with some funding from Department for Culture, Media and Sport. Pretty sure that's the right letters and words. And they show some really good promise about how you can formalise some of these partnerships and how that means that you can make more of what exists within the system, but also they've been very successful in securing additional resource to come in as well. So I think actually the emergent promise and evaluation from those local youth partnerships really aligns with the ambitions we've established locally, which are set out in paragraph 12 of the report. So we see the local youth partnership and the development of that as something that will be key in the delivery of the youth strategy. It's really important to note that this is not something that the council commands and controls. It's changing the landscape, as Joe says. It's something where we come alongside those partners. We will have clear expectations about what we want to see for youth provision in the city. Those partners also will come to the table with expectations about what they would like to achieve, what young people are telling them. It is a partnership approach, which we will, as set out in the report, develop with them. So I'm sure that's the short version. I promise that's the short version. I'll pass you over to Joe, who can give you some of the highlights about current activity taking place.
So yeah, we've got a summary of some of the activity that's taken place in the city from paragraph 23. This highlights some of the activity that's delivered through the HAF programme, the Holiday Activities and Food programme, that's been very successful in the city, alongside some of the activity that's been delivered through the ward funding arrangements, and also work that we're involved in with regard to the delivery of neighbourhood action plans, when we're working with ward members and ward teams to review ward priorities and mobilise groups around that through the delivery of social action projects. A good example of that is some of the work that we've been undertaking in the west side of the city linked to Raise York, where we're looking more closely at data associated with 0 to 5-year-olds to support school readiness, and how we can work with partners around that, alongside a great example of the work that's taken place with the place at Westfield, working with the University of York. We also naturally been working with the youth council around some of this, and I can see some of the members that are in the room were at the recent youth council meeting where they were looking at what was it, the recent voting that was taking place around the priorities that young people were seeing in the city as a result of the work in their schools. So there's a lot of provision that already takes place, not least the work that's delivered through the partners that are and providers that are a part of the youth network in the city. And as Neil said, we're very keen to work more closely with that network, collaborate with them to move them towards more of a local youth partnership model where we feel they can act as a convener with us to attract further external funding to support the delivery of youth provision in the city. We do have 40,000 pounds worth of investment within the council-based budget to support the delivery of youth work in the city, reflecting that there is a need for more of a strategic approach that would complement the activity that's already delivered through the ward grant funding arrangements. So again, there's an opportunity to explore that with the youth network and a local youth partnership model, reflecting a collaborative commissioning approach with them. So that investment opportunity is covered in the paper. In terms of the timeline, that's at paragraph 45 within the paper, that we would be looking to crystallise the priorities with the local youth network around the youth strategy during March, as well as working with the Young People's Foundation to develop the local youth partnership and the development of a local area support plan. From April to June, we would be looking to finalise the strategy and the model of the local youth partnership, and then from July to actually launch the strategy. But as Neil said, we're very keen to work collaboratively with those local partners and providers of youth work, and to take those partners with us to ensure that everybody is bought into the youth strategy and the priorities we co-design.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Burton, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Knight.
I think it's a really good idea. Obviously, the only question that sprung to mind is, obviously this is kind of that continuation from kind of a centralised council-run services to continuing as kind of decentralised work with partners in the city. One thing that's been raised before is kind of issues around perhaps how well trained partners are in their kind of safeguarding training of the people who work within those organisations, and how much oversight we have. I wonder whether it is just an opportunity for us to use this partnership to actually improve understanding of safeguarding within those organisations, whether there's any plans to do that in kind of conjunction with early help or other parts.
Yeah, so just to pick up on that, certainly there is that opportunity there. It has taken different shapes in other areas. Just in terms of explaining some of the steps that we've already taken, we have made the e-learning licenses for the online basic children safeguarding awareness course available for free for members of the youth network. So we've used some of the Raise York transformation grant to support that. And we have also are developing a multi-agency workforce induction tool, which includes some references towards safeguarding children, as well as that early help space, which is very important, particularly for this area of work.
Councillor Wilson. Oh, this was a follow-up.
Thanks, Chair. I'm interested to know that you're looking at expanding and supporting the youth service work that's going on. I know sort of in Fishergate, when we looked at trying to get some youth service work, specifically around some of the problem areas that residents had identified, there was a lack of capacity to offer that. And I just wondered whether community officers have fed in where there's been requests that we haven't been able to put that service on, or whether we need to feed that into you so that you're aware of those kind of additional needs that we've got that we haven't been able to support.
Yeah, I mean, we'd expect the community officers to be feeding that back into us so we can have those discussions and then repeat that discussion with the youth network, because there's the opportunity there, as I was saying before, for working in partnership with those very many providers that attend the youth work to see, okay, if we can't deliver it this way, can we maybe work through a different route and a different lens to respond to the need for a different group of providers and opportunities? And I think that's been one of the really successful things we've heard back from other areas that have local youth partnerships in place, where you see that more deliberate collaboration and pooling together of resources from those providers to respond to need. So that's something we're really interested in exploring.
Yeah, I hope that exact example is the sort of thing that having a youth strategy could help, because I think several wards have tried to commission some youth provision and haven't been able to, and relying on wards to choose to fund things or not, or decide whether it's a priority or not, isn't very strategic. So yeah, I hope that having a strategy would help with that sort of thing.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. The first is, what considerations and measures have been put in place with the strategy to reach the children and young people in the outer areas? I have particular interest in my ward's rural west, but it applies to other wards as well, where there is difficulty perhaps with transport and actually accessing. So there may well be lots going on, you know, within a couple of miles, but it's physically getting to them. But also, has consideration been given to the fact that there are pockets of deprivation in those communities, and we do need to make sure that they're included in any strategy to develop youth activities for them. The second part of it is another part, is my area of concern particularly is I think the tweens are quite a neglected group very often. And I think that's reflected in the fact that the figures in your report are very clear, that obviously there's a much bigger take up for primary school than secondary. And I suspected this, and it's borne out, is that that's mainly because parents have to find provision for primary school children while they're working. And older children might be left a bit more to their devices. But my concern is it's the very fact that they're being left to their own devices that possibly has an impact on some of the community policing issues we were talking about earlier, antisocial behaviour, but also for their mental health and well-being. I mean, I think the parents around this table will agree, your child sitting on PlayStation right through half term for 9-10 hours a day is not a good way to do it. So is there anything we can do to encourage that group and get more activities that attract them and interest them?
So yeah, just to pick up on your points in terms of the strategy and its consideration about being a citywide strategy. Certainly that's something that we would want to work with the partnership on. We've already got a number of partners that will deliver detached or mobile youth type provision. So yes, we would want to reflect that. And coming back to the previous point about the work that you do within your own wards as well, in terms of identifying needs and saying, actually, this is something that we need in the area, something that we'd hope the strategy and the youth partnership would improve the capacity to be able to respond to those things in a better way. We are also linking with the University of York, which is currently doing a comparative study about geographies of inequality, about access to youth provision, which they've shared their interim findings with us. So that's based on interviews they've done in York as well as in other areas. And we expect that to take the learning from that and to use that in how we further develop and deliver the strategy with our partners. I really hear what you're saying in terms of tweens, and I do recognise what you're saying. Our statutory responsibilities are within that 13 to 19 age range. I think it's an important point to make, though, about how do we accommodate those, both in terms of provision, but also I think there's a wider question that poses for us in the city as well about how we're supporting those families and access to other things, as well as supporting those parents as well, who, as you say, sometimes might feel disconnected from the child the other side of the door. So I recognise what you're saying. I think part of the solution sits here, but also it might well span across some of our other strategies as well.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for this report and overview. I suppose I wanted to just make some observations, really, and then hopefully you can maybe give us some positive feedback on bits as well. I mean, I think first of all, it's been mentioned a few times about strategic approach, and I think that feels to me so important, because I think, you know, over the last few years as a ward councillor, we've been able to do limited things with our ward budget, but it's always felt very hand to mouth. And certainly the feedback that we've had from providers has been that they've struggled to recruit youth workers because they don't know whether they've got the funding, you know, at the end of this project that we're doing or whatever it might be. And even where slightly longer term funding has been in place, I think there still are issues around capacity within the city for people to go into youth work, because actually, if you don't know that you're going to have a job in 6 months' time because the funding runs out. So I think it's really positive to see a £40,000 recurring pot going into the youth partnership strategy. But, you know, looking at ways that we can perhaps use that to leverage further longer term funding, I think is really, really important. So, you know, just hoping that that's certainly within the thinking. And then I suppose in a way, possibly touching to some of the point that Councillor Knight's making around the different types of groups of young people that there are in the city. And, you know, the notion of co-production and consultation is obviously hugely important. You know, if you're trying to, particularly teenagers, if you're trying to get them to go to something, the worst possible thing you can do is suggest the thing that you think is going to be cool, of course. But I'm really conscious of there being groups of young people, certainly in my ward, and I'm sure this is reflected across the city, that are not engaged with almost anything. And so how you start to shape a service that could engage those young people, and yet they're the most, almost in terms of our priority in our ward, and I'm sure it'll be the same in others, they're the people you most want to engage. So any sort of thoughts on how that co-production works for those groups that perhaps are the people that are, I mean, we say easy to ignore, but, you know, or hard to reach, but it's easy to ignore, isn't it? They're the ones that probably cause us the most trouble, but then don't turn up to the things that we seek to put on.
Yeah, definitely agree with all the comments. That the point about the strategic approach, I think that's something that's come through when we've had the 3 recent sessions with the York Youth Network, where we've been doing the system mapping work. And you can just see from those conversations that we have with the network that opportunities get missed. When external funding opportunities crop up, they get missed. And because some of the network members haven't been actively collaborating, they've not come together to put in applications that allows us to then to respond to strategic issues in the city. So that's certainly something that we feel that the local youth partnership model would be able to respond to. And as you were saying again, Councillor, around training up youth workers, etc., to build capacity, to build those new youth leaders of the future, that's something that we've identified within one of the preliminary priorities within the strategy that we would like to explore with the partners about. And again, we were talking about the 40k, you know, that can, and I know that's keen point of view from Martin and Pauline, that how that can provide us a route of leverage to bring other funds into the city. The point about reaching the most excluded as well. Some of the positive conversations we've had with the Together with Young People network that have been doing some work in the city over the last 18 months or so around and with those young people that are the most excluded around issues of power and exclusion, and supporting them to share their voice around why the system and providers maybe aren't reaching them, is something that we'd very much like to build on to ensure that the strategy has that deliberate reach. And we're bringing those most excluded into the centre of the strategy so that they're not on the outskirts. So again, there's some of that evidence from that inquiry that they've been involved in and piece of research over the last 18 months for us to build on as well.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just come in on that point by Councillor Crosher as well. I think because the £40,000 I think is really important here. The fact that it is reoccurring is really important. I'm really glad that we could put that into the budget, because I think it sort of, firstly, it shows a part of our intent for how we're serious about supporting young people. But also, as we've just heard, it is good leverage for other things. And I think that partnership model then leads to further leverage because, for example, there have been funding bids that have been made available, pots of funding within the city, but only groups with over a £200,000 turnover could apply for them. Now, actually, many of the little pots in York, many of the little organisations could not do that. In fact, none of them could do that. But if they were in some form of partnership together, they'd probably tip over that threshold. So that's one part of it. And I think the age-old concern and problem of how do we support teenagers and how do we get teenagers to attend things that we want them to attend. Quite frankly, you ain't ever going to get everybody, but there are things that you can do to improve things. And that's why this idea of a local youth partnership as part of this strategy, and the strategy is the key word there, is so important. I mean, my dear old mum and dad met working on a summer play scheme, which was running over the 6 weeks to run for young people. And that was something for younger children. And that then those young children who were used to having youth work and youth experience then went to the youth group that existed when they were older because they were used to it. Now, if you put on a youth group now for teenagers, they won't go to it because they're not used to doing that thing. And I think that's what we want to talk about. We will, of course, get some that go, Councillor Nelson. I can see you shaking your head at me, but you're not going to get the numbers that we potentially would have got in the past. And I think that that's something that by actually building that up from primary school and from younger ages, that is going to improve your attendance because you're building those positive habits. That's a really important thing here. And I think that that's hopefully by that having that reoccurring funding, it's something that we can keep looking at year on year, build up over time, and that can make a difference. So I think it's that building of habits that is really going to change things. And I think that, you know, anything we can do to support older children is great. It's just finding activities that we can put on that are appropriate. And I think one thing that young people would probably say is having the infrastructure within a local community is important. In my own wards, young people talk to me all the time about, can you not just put some football nets up somewhere? They want to go out and be healthy. It's having that physical infrastructure to do it. And isn't it a shame that council budgets have been stripped so far that even proves difficult? And then I think finally, the other side of that is actually sometimes young people do just want a space that they can make their own. Not necessarily let's provide them an activity, but actually let's just provide the space that they can make their own, you know. But again, that's speaking for them, and I think this should be more about co-producing it with young people. But that would be my thoughts.
Is this another? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, I think just to be really clear, I think by developing a strategic approach and building the workforce across the city, I think we will hopefully see over time a great deal more confidence in getting to some of the groups that perhaps we're struggling to get to or are more complex to manage support, whatever terms you want to use. I think in time we will see a growth in confidence within that group. And in reality, there's huge amounts in York, you know, much more than many other areas. This is about bringing it together in a way that makes some sense rather than acting in competition. You know, some of the groups that are providing services at the moment, albeit very small, they're almost in competition with each other for funding rather than coming together and actually getting a great deal more funding together.
There you go.
Thank you. And sorry for shaking my head at you, Councillor Webb. It's interesting because I think that I understand exactly what you mean. Having been to the youth council recently and talking about the kind of things that were a priority, it was amazing that youth provision was not priority in any of those schools who are voting on it, because none of those young people know what youth provision is. So I understand where you're getting at. However, we do have recent and ongoing experience of trying to implement this kind of provision in our ward in Westfield, with some measure of success, and with attendance, with really good attendance. And the bit that kind of, I suppose, concerns me, or like, I just feel like the bit that's missing from this strategy in a way is, because we're talking, I mean, I say this strategy, this isn't a strategy, and I really am looking forward to seeing the strategy, because it's almost quite frustrating to be looking at and discussing documents about a strategy without having a strategy to discuss. Although I really appreciate the process you're going through. But there is, let's say the youth network that exists at the moment, you've got that wonderful list of provisions, but so many of those provisions are very specific and very contextual, and you know, this is what one wonderful church can offer. This is what Big Futures Foundation can offer. You know, it makes sense that they're within the network, but what they're offering isn't youth provision in that wider sense of what we're talking about here today, for example. They're not suddenly going to be setting up a youth club, because that's not how they work, as far as I'm aware. You know, maybe they will. But I hope you understand what I mean, in terms of, there's a lot of organisations on there, but there's not actually a lot of sufficiency or organisations that can be tapped into to go, right, great, let's come across the city and do it over here, or this is the need, let's uproot this church and just plonk it there instead. We can't be doing things like that. And one of the big issues we've had in our ward recently is we have had attendance, good attendance, from the children who need it the most. And that hasn't changed the fact that, because our provision in the city is so bitty and, you know, individual organisation led, one of the provisions collapsed because of issues around staffing, because of issues around spaces, and about like just that kind of resilience within the organisation when that isn't their priority. You know, we've got another fantastic youth provider working in Foxwood and Chapelfield, but that doesn't mean that they aren't still precarious in the fact that they've had staffing issues recently. They've had to cut back those sessions. And we're at a point where those young people will expect those sessions, rely on those sessions. And, you know, all that kind of incredible magic that we know is why we need youth provision, you know, children and young people having those positive role models, being able to build those relationships with the services and the police and, you know, the sports things, like all that brilliant stuff was happening. And that doesn't mean it's not precarious. And what I really think we need to try and achieve, and I don't understand, I can't see how, with the £40,000 and with the stuff that we're talking about tonight, really, is how on earth can we try and make what we do have less precarious? Some of that's around funding. And I think it's really important that we have a good local youth partnership, and that we're able to bring them together, and that we're able to use the money in the budget to improve kind of opportunities to get funding into the city. You know, that funding thing is really important. And if we as a council can take a lead on bringing that funding in for those individual organisations, there's so much value to that. But in a slightly wider sense, my kind of question and concern is still, how can we stop the delivery of these services being based on one member of staff who really wants to do a youth club, but then leaves that particular organisation, and then that whole provision, you know, falls apart, or one space that actually can no longer take that group on a Thursday. Those are the bits that as a city we're so impacted by. So sorry to put such a big challenge. I'm really glad we're talking about this, but that's what I want to know.
I think your question is about is about resilience, and actually that's the entire point of this, to be quite frank. So it's absolutely about bringing those provisions together so they can do different things that they may not be doing at the moment, but also can we working together? Can they share staff across different provision? For example, if we build a workforce, but also, you know, 30 different organisations putting in for a lottery bid of £1 million instead of £20,000 just allows you to bring something that's incredibly different for the city, that will be much more diverse in the future. I think it will allow you to get some of those things, although I would say for the population that's around the table, let's not just focus on youth clubs, which is our generation's approach to youth services. It's not necessarily young people's approach to youth services currently. Might be for some, but not necessarily for most.
Just like to point out that youth provision had been cut by the time I was going through this. So I'm not being associated in the same generation. There. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very interesting report, and yeah, I agree. The issue is about improving capacity across the whole city. There's a number of organisations that hadn't been included in this youth strategy. I'm thinking the Scouts, who do a lot of work locally, and they themselves are constantly seeking volunteers, and funding is not always easy when you've got minibuses that break down. But I think there's looking at this in the longer term, ensuring that you've got a wide number of kids with lots of different interests, and it's making sure that all of the interests are included. I have from memories of discussions with the HAF team about activities that don't involve footballs and the goals, because there are absolutely of that, but equally they're all thinking back. I didn't. So and there are lots of activities to get people outdoors, but that there's a wider variety of things that young people are looking at as options. And there was just one thing that leapt out in this is there's a lot of people involved, but I don't see councillors' role being included in that. And I think it's something that is important to get that local community view across the piece, recognising that activities come in and come out, but there's that overriding what is there to do when you get that on the doorstep quite a lot. There's nothing particular, then you provide a list of things that there are to do, but it's maintaining that list on a real-time basis, and then knowing that where there are opportunities for funding, which a lot of organisations have seen ward committee funding as that's it. It's actually there's other opportunities that maybe they haven't looked at, and yes, ward funding can be included in order to multiply into other funds, but it's making sure that that's all factored in so that you're getting the maximum impact in an area and that you're meeting all of those needs simultaneously.
I think apologies if it doesn't come across, because it's integral. It should be integral in terms of the involvement of councillors as ward members within their ward teams as a part of that process of identifying local priorities and co-designing local solutions with local organisations and local people as active citizens. So we see that as a given, and I think it's in there, but maybe it should have come out a bit more deliberately. And when we're talking about moving towards more of a deliberate neighbourhood action planning model to review priorities and mobilise resources around that, again, members are integral to that. But there's an opportunity, I'd say, to explore members' involvement with the network and the involving local youth partnership as well. Because again, that's all about working more strategically in the city and responding to need, but supporting the partners to work more together, as Martin was saying. So again, members have that convening role as well, and there's the obvious link then with the health and wellbeing strategy and everything else. So we certainly see members as being integral to this, so we can bring that out more as we move forward.
Any more questions? I'll just throw a couple in, if you don't mind. Point 27, just as my understanding, was that an awful lot of places that were never taken up?
So, was this in relation to the house?
Yeah, because you seem to say there was 5,460 places, but they didn't have 5,430 people.
Turn on. So yeah, we perform very well when you compare ourselves, the performance of our HAF program and take up of places compared to other parts of the country in the region. But it's one of the issues with the HAF program is a lot of people book on, but don't always necessarily turn up. You know, so that's reflected in figures. But when I was looking at the figures before, you know, when we've got, you know, upwards of 19,000 places, and we've had upwards of nearly 19,000 bookings, but the extent to which people then turn out, you do have a gap. But the figures also don't necessarily reflect that the young people that attend on a unique basis can attend more than one session. Yeah, so they can attend a number of 4-hour sessions. So that then gets aggregated up as in the performance figures. So it comes across as a bit of a disproportionate gap. But we're lauded in the region and nationally around the performance of the HAF program and our take up and our efforts to get this promoted right the way throughout the fabric of York and our communities.
So it's better than it looks, and
yes,
there is still room for people to
come
along. Cool. The event on the 20th, excuse me if I've missed the email, are we getting invited to that?
Sorry, I should have sorry, I should have mentioned I'd added that bit in. The event on the 20th is a regional session that we're having, so you wouldn't be invited to that one, but we will be putting in place the date in the not too distant future. And yes, if colleagues are interested in joining us for that, we're happy to extend that invitation.
And then just again, thinking of our planning the year ahead, obviously you're aiming for April, June conclusion, then July launch. When would be a fair time to ask you back to say it's been fantastic?
2028.
Tad earlier, I think.
I would suggest the very back end of the year, possibly even the start of the next year. To give it
I think calendar year or our year.
Calendar year.
So a year sort of January of 2025.
December, January time, I think that's probably a reasonable time.
Thank you. All happy? Lovely.
Thanks, colleagues.
Guys, thank you.
Welcome, Maxine. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you've enjoyed your evening?
Yes, yeah, it's been a fascinating sit, definitely. Thank you for the invitation to come back, Chair. Obviously, my report is an update on 2 areas that Scrutiny had asked to be updated on following the initial paper on the SEND operational plan in September 2023. The Scrutiny Committee did ask for assurance that 2 of the actions at that stage were not underway, were actually taking place, and they were actions 4.1 and 4.5 in the plan. Both of those actions are now in place. We are well advanced in terms of the drafting of the SEND JSNA, which is now due to be shared with the Health and Wellbeing Board at its next meeting, and also with the SEND Partnership Board, also happening in March. There's been a lot of engagement work which has taken place, which is underpinning the work on the SEND JSNA, and it will be used to review the strategy, the future priorities around joint commissioning, because alongside that, in parallel, we've been doing some work to refresh our joint commissioning strategy with health, and central to it are the emerging patterns that are coming out of refreshing the SEND JSNA to help us to really
look at what new priorities we might be in that joint commissioning space. The other area that we hadn't got underway in September was work around the preparation for adulthood protocol. That is now written and is in place. There is now a preparation for adulthood strategic board, which has been established. And one of the key things is the communication strategy, which is around ensuring that the PFA protocol is well understood by all partners in the city, and that it is driving work. It's really important because it's also one of the focus visits in the SEND inspection framework for this current calendar year. So preparation for adulthood comes under the SEND inspection framework. It also comes under the framework which adult services will be inspected on in the future. So it's a really important joint piece of work across children's and adult services that is being developed as we speak. All areas of the SEND operational plan are now being worked on. So all of them are in train. A particular piece of work that we're doing, again with partnership with schools and colleagues in health, is around the focus on neurodiversity in York. There are two aspects to that. One is the National Health-led PINS approach, which will see 9 primary schools working alongside health trainers to develop understanding of neurodiversity. And in parallel with that, 8 schools are doing the ADHD Friendly Schools Award over the next few months. So that will be a third of our schools who are actually actively engaged in that programme. There is a universal programme of training as well, which is being rolled out at the moment for the education workforce from early years through to the end of secondary, and also a programme of webinars for parents and carers as well, which are being rolled out over the next few months. They'll be repeated between now and December. So that will increase awareness and coverage around developing the city's understanding of neurodiversity, and that's been taken as well into some of the work that we're wanting to do to refresh the SEND strategy, which the current SEND strategy ends in 2025. So there will be an engagement programme that will be taking place over the summer with parents and carers and other stakeholders, which will inform the review and the redevelopment of that strategy going forward. A particular strand within that will also be looking at the inclusion charter with schools, so that we actually are working with Schools Forum and the York Schools and Academies Board to develop and strengthen an approach to what inclusive schools look like. So that's a strand of work that's taking place over the coming months. Our challenges remain around sufficiency, and that's right across our system. So it's the sufficiency of what's taking place with our health partners, and also we're doing a piece of work around school sufficiency based on the learning from this year's phase transfers. To support that piece of work as well, we will be drafting and publishing by the end of April a SEND admissions guide for parents. There is obviously a general admissions guide for parents, but some of the feedback that we've had from SEND parents is that they would value having an admissions guide which just sets out the process and why it's different for children and young people who have an education, health and care plan, because they don't go through the general admissions process. And we're responding to that feedback from parents and carers to ensure that that guide is developed to sit alongside the general admissions guide, to make it much easier to navigate and to understand what the different types of specialist provisions in the city are for, who they're for, and also to walk them through the stages of the SEND admissions process. So I'll leave it there.
Questions? And I can believe you're all happy. Councillor Crawshay.
I've always got a question, don't worry. Just in general terms, so the send capital schemes, which I think are 2.4 on page 120, and I presume that that's a sort of a longer term part of the strategy, just capital programs often are longer term. But my understanding is in terms of the preschool age children and young people in the city, there are quite a lot of needs that are sort of increasing in terms of, I think I was told, and I may be wrong on this, but things like autism diagnosis has increased sort of 300% in under fives. There's obviously lots of stuff around, you know, children coming into school with developmental needs that are not where they were, say, 2 or 3 years ago, in, you know, pre-COVID, those sort of things. And I'm just wondering, within the sort of capital aspect of it, obviously we're talking about sufficiency and within the existing school sites that we have and all of that, but, you know, has there been thought around saying, you know, do we need a different new provision, or what would that provision look like? What does the provision look like in 10 years' time when those children and young people now are in year 10 and 11 and that sort of thing? And strategically from where we're sitting now, how do we?
Yeah, that is the work that we are doing at the moment in the SEND team, which is we're doing some work around developing the SEND sufficiency strategy, which is looking at those trends and mapping that against the available provision. It has to be got right, because however much you build, you'll fill. So it's alongside that, it's also looking at the social model of disability as well, and the fact that children and young people, the whole idea of what the original Warnock report was to encourage as much inclusion as possible within society and within our education settings. There is also as well, one of the things that we are aware of is there needs to be more time spent on really looking at what is the nature of some of those issues in the early years, and whether they are things which are developmental delay which will work its way through with good intervention, or are they patterns which will continue throughout the young person's life. And that is some work that we are looking at alongside partners. There is some work, obviously, which involves our health partners as well, around what are the best interventions in those early years, which can actually intervene early to have maximum impact on some of those areas of developmental delay. As you know, nationally, there's a lot of concern at the moment about children who are not school ready because they're still in nappies. And some of that obviously is what we need to look at alongside health colleagues around what interventions are in place to support families with toilet training and some of those aspects. We do know as well that, you know, schools are reporting, as our early year settings, more bowel and bladder issues and problems, and some of the paediatricians are picking up on that as well. But it's starting to look at, well, what are the good interventions that can help with that? Sleep hygiene is a problem at the moment for some young people and children, and so it's looking at, you know, how are we bringing in best practice around how to deal with problems with sleep. So there's a number of aspects of this that we need to be planning through over the next few years. We won't just build ourselves out of this. So it's a more complex picture around managing sufficiency, which is why I'm saying it's also about sufficiency within partner agencies as well as within local authority.
Just very quickly to just add, I think SEND provision or special school provision, unlike other school provision, isn't restricted to catchment or even place. So we can build provision in York and East Riding, North Yorkshire, other local authorities that are across boundaries will take those places that we build. So it is absolutely making sure that we work across the region as well and across partners.
I just add to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but whilst people from North Yorkshire and East Riding could take those places, it is assessed on a needs basis. So it's very, very much on need, not geography. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, that is correct. It is, there are two tests basically. Is the provision suitable for the needs of the child? And is that provision something that can be delivered within, you know, sort of a reasonable budget as well?
And I think just while I'm talking, I want to thank Maxine for all the work that she and her team are doing on this, and please pass that on to the team, because I think it's a huge job, and it is something that is that everyone everywhere in all councils are trying to get to grips with, and it's certainly something special educational needs provision. We do need to work in partnership, and I think that again and again we need to be asking what our health partners in particular and schools, how are they working with us as conveners to do the best we can for young people in the city? Alongside that, how are all of us, City of York Council, York Schools and Academies Board, the NHS, how are we listening to what parents, carers, and indeed young people themselves are saying? That has got to be part of how we deliver that sufficiency strategy and how we identify what is needed across the city. And I know that that's ongoing and is working. So yeah, I just think that thanks for the work you're doing on this. And in terms of building it out, I think Maxine's perfectly right. If you build it, it will get filled. And we do need to think carefully about what we provide, and make sure it is definitely what's going to be needed, not just what is wanted, if you see what I mean. Because I think lots of people can say this would help, and I'm sure it, you know, in a lot of cases thing X probably would, but actually is it the best use of our resource when we all have quite limited resources?
Just super quickly, I think just to be clear, I mean, I'm not advocating for building our way out of a problem at all, but I do think that there is an issue around the type of schools that we have currently, the nature of the buildings, and the need that children and young people are professing, you know, and experiencing on what they have. And so I suppose what I'm seeking to get at is partly around what do we need now, right here and now, but also, you know, in 5 years, in 10 years time. It's not just about physical bums on seats in classrooms. It's about, is the classroom of a sufficient type that enables that child to be able to access education, learning in a way that is useful and meaningful. And I think we do just need to be careful. It's really, really important that we're listening to the feedback from parents and families. I think we shouldn't shy away from trying to aim for the best that we possibly can. I don't think anybody around the table would disagree with that, which is why I think it's really, really positive to hear the talk about, you know, trying to make the whole school system as inclusive as possible, because I think that ultimately is the answer, really, in the grand scheme of things. But it is looking at, within that, in order to become inclusive, what actually is, you know, the physical building doing for the young people that need to access it, and how does that work, and how does that work now, but how does that work in, you know, if we end up with a third of the school population having you know, some form of neurodiversity, which is where it looks like it is going, what does a school that is genuinely inclusive of neurodiversity and any other needs look, you know, what does that school look like versus what we built 50 or 100 years ago?
Yeah, yeah. And it is one of the things, obviously, that we are working with schools on in terms of understanding those sensory needs that certain young people have, and it does vary. So, you know, that's the other thing. By its very nature, children are different in the way that they will respond to those environments. So what we've got to have a look at is what are we learning from research and best practice, and what can we bring in to make some subtle adaptations to what happens in school buildings around that. It is one of the things that is part of the work that the DFE are doing around the SEND and AP implementation plan at the moment. So they are doing some work around considering what does need to change in terms of inclusion in mainstream and the adaptations that can take place. And I think the other thing, obviously, is that some of the building projects that the DFE have had on their plans for a while, that they haven't delivered on them yet. So that's taking a bit of time to get that in place. But it is very, very clear that there will need to be thought given to size of certain spaces for certain children, because they find them very, very challenging. We're learning a lot from the ERP that we built at Huntington School, which has created a smaller space for some children who really struggle with high anxiety. It's made quite a significant difference for those young people. So capturing some of that learning and sharing it is really important.
Did you have something, John? Councillor Webb?
Yeah, just briefly following on from that point, I think probably the elephant in the room I always find in this situation is I have the lovely privilege of, as exec member, being able to visit a lot of our primary schools and walk around our primary schools and see what those spaces are like. In my day job as a secondary school teacher, I have quite a reasonable knowledge of what they look like, and the difference is phenomenal in terms of the way primary school is built and has adapted to support the needs of young people, and how a secondary school, given the very nature of how it works, struggled to adapt in the same ways. And a large part of that is because there has been zero funding for building in secondary schools for a long time, because it costs a lot of money. We've done bits and pieces, but nothing, you know, whole school. There you go. I think that's something that we do need to keep coming back to with our schools, is how, because one of the issues is when children transition from primary to secondary, of course, that experience is suddenly very, very different. And I think that is a big culture shock for that young person in year 7, as an 11-year-old. And that, I think, is one of the biggest barriers to get past. And you can get past that. It can go quite well, not always, but it can work. But that problem is that jarring change. And I think there has to be a sort of a compromise found. And I think that our secondary schools can learn a lot from our primary schools. And I think sharing that knowledge could be quite important to what we do going forward.
I think it's important as well to recognise that in the last few years, we've had a bulge of children going through our secondary schools. So our secondary schools are fuller than they've ever been. When I first came to York in 2009, you know, we were talking about closing secondary schools because the demographic had dipped so far. And actually what I noticed when I came to York was how small class size was in the secondary schools. That's completely reversed as that bulge of children has gone through. What you're seeing in the primary schools is a flat demographic and them starting to empty out, which is creating some opportunities for them to create those smaller inclusion spaces. So we've got that as well. Our secondary schools at the minute do feel different, and they do feel very busy because we've got more children in them than we've had for quite a few years. And that's just one of those accidents of the demographic. It will go back down the other way in a couple of years' time. So it's also trying to anticipate some of those changing trends as well within the demographic in the city.
Councillor Waller, thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Maxine, you'd mentioned the work that you've been doing with health and getting them to more fully participate. I think it would be helpful to understand where there's been progress there, the backdrop of restructuring of the ICBs, and therefore getting them to do more that links in with what you need, what schools needs, what pupils need.
I think there's still more work to do, but what we can definitely say is that as the ICB are settling its structures down, they have adopted SEND as one of their ICB priorities. So they are viewing it as one of the things that they have to work on in a local area. We've seen some changes in personnel within the ICB, and obviously that means as well that it takes time for things to settle down. But that what I get from them is a commitment to work at place level to identify some clear priorities. So one of the priorities we've identified is around speech and language therapy, and what that looks like in York. Obviously, we've got some learning from early talk for York in the way that we've used assault differently. But it's also doing some work about how do we get that as an approach, which is more scalable and beginning to impact on more families. And that's something that we've got as a task and finish priority over the next few months. The other area that we're working on as well in a way that we can do some joined up work is around children who cannot attend school. Not that they, that they're avoiding school, it's that they cannot attend for a mental health reason. And so looking at how can we work together almost as a multidisciplinary team to look at that differently. I'm working at the moment with trying to get a clinical psychologist and an educational psychologist to work together to produce a formulation around that we can then use to say, these are some of the things that we feel we could work on with one primary school and one secondary school to see if we can get some success to begin with. So we, sort of what we want to do is think more and more creatively around how we can bring resources together, not just money together, but also physical people with skills to work together in a different way.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to hear you say that. Actually, that's one of the things that is sort of, we've talked about before on this committee, those young people who can't attend school and the provision. So that's really wonderful. And I'll be really interested to see what the early talk for York scalable model looks like. I was going to ask about that actually, but you've just answered that question. So the only thing I'll say is it says 4.2 twice.
That's just it.
Yeah, well, I just thought it was worth saying because I noticed it. But other than that, thank you so much for bringing this back to scrutiny. And it's really great to see those things moving forward.
No, that's it. That's fine.
Come back next time.
Yeah.
So-
Come back when you got your numbers. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I taught history, not maths.
Thank you very much. I noticed on option 9, we need to put that in for our work plan for the future. Yeah, so option 9, you want us to consider what we want to put in for future and when.
Oh, sorry. It's for scrutiny to think about what you would want as an ongoing oversight of the work around SEND. And sort of which aspects of the operational plan, the strategy you would like regularly to have an update on.
Yeah, I mean, your report's really good, so think we do need to nail it down to 4.2, don't we? Yes, councillor Webb.
I did mention this to you and Vice Chair about
some data.
No, about the baby infographic data that we were going to.
Ah, yes, the Nesta data.
Nesta
Yeah,
data, thank you. I was getting there slowly, but it would have taken a while.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if, because I've had sight of this data and think it will be really, really valuable, because it's something that gives us really good information on what is going on with our very, very youngest citizens, but it boils it down to wars level. And I know that's something that was raised earlier on about obesity, for example. So I was wondering if that could be something that could be made available to this committee at an appropriate time. Maxine, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's basically, it links to some of the work that we've been doing around trying to map the demographic around the 0 to 5s in the city at ward level, so that you get a map of how many 0 to 5s there are, but also their particular demographic indicators. And it's some work that Rob Newton, who many of you know, has been working on as part of a partnership with Nesta, which is an innovation charity. And it gives us the opportunity to really think about how we can target provision in different wards. So Rob would be very, very pleased to present that to Scrutiny, and he's welcoming the interest if it's possible to come to Scrutiny and share that.
Have you a suggested time? Are we full out?
I mean, I suppose it would need a covering report, but it could be done relatively quickly.
Yes, yeah, Rob's always got plenty of data and covering reports available. But it links as well, obviously, to the best starting life stuff that goes with the Raise family hubs as well. So it just helps to set all of that in context.
And I just wonder, from my point of view, in terms of strategic outlook and in terms of this group being scrutiny and policy, I think having that to then almost have that aware in your heads to say, all right, well, actually, now when we're looking at our strategy for sense efficiency or childcare or health or obesity, anything like that, having it, you know, from the very start, at our earliest, youngest people, and indeed their parents, that I think could be really, really beneficial. So whenever it fits for you guys, I suppose, but sooner rather than later.
Where do we go up to? April, don't we? So we've got our meet. Well, I'm going to suggest later we have a casual meeting just to come up with our strategy. So we'll bear in mind it can be an early starter for us.
Yeah, you know, as I say, Rob's quite keen to come to Scrutiny. So you know, if you just give him a date, he'll
be there.
Report ready.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Cush.
Yeah, just on this sense strategy as well. I mean, I'm just in its broader sense. I'm just thinking, because obviously there's quite a lot of things that are almost like one-off things that you're tracking through, and then you know some of them are completed, and presumably over time this will all end up being completed. But I'm just wondering then how we then measure what the impact of that being completed is, and whether or not that's where Scrutiny needs to start to look in terms of saying, right, okay, here are some steps that have all been taken. This is what we expected might be the outcome or the result of that. This is what the data or the qualitative information or whatever it's telling us. And, you know, are we satisfied that that met the need that it was identified, or is there another thing that, you know, that is how you create that part of the sort of ongoing review process.
So the strategy that you've got till 25 doesn't end in 25. It will
It would, yeah.
It would then signpost
Yeah,
something else.
basically, that's the operational plan that you've got in front of you, the strategy. Yeah, the document you've got in front of you was the operational plan which Ofsted asked for to show the way in which the current strategy was being implemented. As I said, that the current strategy is due to end in 2025. So what I'm wanting to do is start a review of it now. With stakeholders, including the Parent Carer Forum, so that we are really using it as that opportunity to say, what do we need to prioritise in that strategy in the future? Because that original strategy was written during COVID and it wasn't co-produced. The new strategy, it has to be co-produced and it has to be owned by the stakeholders and it has to be a partnership document. And that's one of the things that we want to start that review as early as possible so that all of that engagement work can take place before we put pen to paper around the new strategy.
It just seems to me that there's something that would be useful for us to do would be like the sort of strategies and looking forward and all of that is always a really good positive thing to be doing, but it's just that little review that says, right, this is what we did, this is what we hoped we'd achieve, this is what we achieved, and then how we sort of
and we
capture
can,
that.
yeah, as I say, I'm quite happy to bring back something that sort of shows our key performance indicators and how we're performing against those.
Can I ask a stupid question? Possibly. Just picking up what Councillor Webb says in terms of scrutiny setting strategy, as well as the officers, as well as the lead member. I mean, is that something that we should really be getting ourselves stuck into as a scrutiny to say, or is my understanding is that if the officers, so if the lead member says, no, I want to do this because I'm in charge, the officers don't have to do it, or can we actually say, actually, Councillor Webb, as a committee, we think this is an even better idea?
You can suggest what you'd like. That's Nichols. Whether I decide to do it or not depends very much on finances and anything else. But no, I mean, when I was in the vice chair position of this committee, we had a subcommittee on mental health, and I remember we put together a report that I then presented at the executive meeting for consideration. I can't honestly remember what happens to that at that point, but that might be something I'd very much welcome. Scrutiny sort of taking more of that sort of role and looking at strategies and thinking about what you can do, you know, within reason.
Well, you know, like I say, I'm sure you've got an open mind on these things.
Always do.
Just to bear in mind.
The council officers are panicking now. We're going to get
just to bear in mind, this is a partnership document, it's a partnership strategy, so it's led by the partnership, it's not led by the council, as well as led by national government in terms of what we're expected to do and what we're expected to do in inspection. I just want to make sure that we're really clear that.
I was more talking generally, not necessarily linked to the SENS document. It was okay. More in general. Calm down. It's all right. Don't worry about it.
Thank you. I just think of you, if it's a good idea, it's a good idea, wherever it comes from. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We might have to stretch some bring it down on it. Sorry.
Microphone to apply. Item 8, discussion of task and finish group. This should be from Emily and Councillors Cuthbertson and Wilson. Are we, without saying you haven't done a fantastic job in your task and finish groups? Go.
So we are in our new task and finish group, as Councillor Clark has joined us. I suspect that Julie has been very busy doing all the work that Maxine's just been talking about. So we're just waiting to have that next meeting and then we'll be able to feedback.
Thank you.
Councillor Knight and I have had many meetings with many different partners, which is wonderful because there's so many different people doing so many brilliant things in the city. Our most recent meeting was with Pauline, and actually looking at some of the work the council has done previously, and I think we're getting to a point where there's a couple more people that are on our list to get in touch with that have come out of that meeting, but we're coming towards a point where we want to start pulling together what we found out and putting it into some sort of draft report, which we're then, tell me if I'm wrong on this, planning on sharing with Pauline and her team, and then kind of co-writing a finished version and co-producing something. Does that sound like what you think we're doing?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, we'll comment on the report for you to present back. Yes, of course.
So we feel like we're nearly ready to sort of actually pull everything together. We've just got a couple more meetings and people that we want to make sure we've spoken to first.
Work plan. Put the microphone on that time. Now, last year we had that informal meeting to pull that together. We've got one more meeting on the cycle this year, I think. Is that right, Reece? Got April. Yeah, and then we start a new year. So do we want to do the same as we did last year, or do you want to let me and Councillor Nelson throw some ideas in? How do you want to come up with next year's 12-month plan? Councillor Croucher.
Not just because it was my idea, but I thought
it's a very good one.
I thought it was really helpful to be able to have that kind of informal round table, everybody talk about the priorities and the kind of objectives of scrutiny for the coming year, and then piece together a plan that then is sort of reflective of those priorities. Because I think, you know, as Councillor Webb said there, you know, the more that we can move scrutiny into a place where we're creating active support for, you know, exec members, officers, you know, and actually being able to give something meaningful, I think that is to all of our benefits. And as I say, I felt that that forum was a really useful place to have that conversation.
Good, I agree. Any other views? It's just trying to squeeze it in now, because we're due to start May the 7th.
Last year we had that informal meeting, took a meeting. As in we didn't have our first proper scrutiny meeting because we had
that's why it
an
says
informal one instead.
Yes.
Is that feasible, or is this something that you think we'd need to
Well,
squish in alongside?
The only thing we've got in May is Q4's financial report, which doesn't take.
So the dates for May for next year to be confirmed at full council. And the balance and performance reports have just been coming every other meeting.
So that wouldn't be there then. In May.
Yeah, looking at a new strategy, so it probably took longer than we've got into some of it now and know what we're looking at. So I suspect it'll be a much quicker meeting.
So we'll keep it as May the 7th rather than trying to squeeze in, because I've got a Merrill to win.
The only thing to consider is I can't remember the date of annual council, but I think annual council is after that date, and there may be changes to the committee membership that there sometimes can be at annual council, and so whether or not it might make more sense to do that with whatever the confirmed committee for the next municipal year is going to be.
Unless, picking up Councillor Knight's point, is that would be a bunch of new people like we will spend a long time. Actually, why not use our experiences? While it may not be all of us who are sitting on this committee, I mean, us three, I'm not sure we can shuffle that much round. But I'd rather use our, you know, you've all sat through the year of, you know, some of us learn it completely from scratch. I think I'd rather build on that experience than go back to the beginning again. You know, in the hope that most people want to continue on the committee. So I think we use May the 7th, knowing that there might be some changes. The sort of, if we have to have any reports, if Rich is going to come back, or we've got Reece's penciled in the public health school survey. If we have to have some things, because that's a good time, I think Councillor Knight's right. I think we were a little bit more wiser that we can make the whole meeting for planning shorter.
Or if we have to have a finance report in there, we could just do that as the only thing that's on the agenda, and then work plan.
Cool. Anyone disagreeing with that? May the 7th is planning meeting. And hopefully everyone continues for the next year. Good. No urgent business. Good.